Well, this is normally the part where I play a dumb little intro video, but this time I'm going to do something a little different. After playing the Godzilla game for the first video, there was something that I wanted to bring up, but I figured it'd be better to do it as a separate thing rather than bringing it up while I'm playing. So, back around 2013 or so, I remember seeing something that I found pretty interesting and actually wanted to help contribute to. And that little something was called Kaiju Combat. Okay, before I begin, a little disclaimer. I don't intend for this to be an entirely accurate depiction of events. It's just something that I wanted to do a bit of digging around in because I was curious about what really happened and decided to do a bit of a fun video on it. Also, it seems like a lot of the information was located in the Kaiju Combat forums. That's where a lot of discussion happens, and unfortunately the servers aren't up anymore, so my research is somewhat limited. Colossal Kaiju Combat, formerly Kaiju Combat, more on that later, was a Kickstarter project that was started back in November of 2012. The project had a goal of $100,000 and was started by people who have worked with the Godzilla franchise before, mostly ex-Pipework software employees. There's 3 big names in the Kickstarter description. First, Simon Strange, the owner of Sunstone Games, which is a company developing this game, and someone who has worked on the past Godzilla games. Second, Matt Frank, an artist who worked on Godzilla comics and the person responsible for all the cool kaiju art that you'll see. Third, Bob Eggleton, a fantasy science fiction artist who has provided concept work for films and art for magazines, books, etc. What about the game? Well, it's 2 games actually. First, Kaiju Land Battles, a free online fighting game, which would be released on Facebook. It would include a roster size of 4 kaijus and a single stage. Not bad for a free game. Second, the retail game named Fall of Nemesis, Clash of the Kaijujin, which would feature a single-player story mode and a bigger roster with more stages. This project had some uniqueness to it though. For example, they wanted their games to be modular. You see, they wanted to release multiple games after the initial 2 were released, and wanted it so that you could use one product with another. For example, increasing your roster with 2 different Colossal Kaiju Combat games. The main selling point, however, was the roster. The roster was going to be original kaijus created by Kickstarter backers and would be voted onto games by the community. Originally, this was an exclusive reward for backers who pledged $500 or more, but eventually became open, so that anyone can submit and potentially get their kaiju made and put into a game. So how is this going to work? According to the Kaiju Combat Wiki, the standard procedure would be 4 one-hour Skype meetings. The initial meeting would be with Simon, talking about the goals of your monster. Not sure what this means, but I assume it's the overall idea of your monster. Second meeting would include both Simon and Matt, where the visual design on the monster is discussed. Third meeting would include Simon and Matt again, where sketches are presented and the monster's name is finalized. And finally, the last meeting would be with Simon, to discuss the backstory of the character and pick names for attributes related to your kaiju. I can't find the information confirming this, but I assume the $500 tier backers already have the right to get their monster designed. On the other hand, those that got their submissions in for free would only get design meetings if their kaiju was chosen by the voting process. Now, you might be thinking, collaborating your original idea with a company, surely they're going to fuck me over and keep the rights to it, right? Wrong. Once the monsters were designed, Sunstone Games offered a contract where they gained the exclusive rights to use your monster in video games. However, you retain all other exclusive rights, meaning you can make whatever you wanted with your monster and make money off of it, as long as it wasn't in a video game. Colossal Kaiju Combat achieved its goal, and raised $112,513 with 1,247 backers. And with that, development and monster design began. Obviously, the idea of designing your own monsters and having the community vote for the game roster was huge. Sunstone Games created the Kaiju Combat forums, which unfortunately isn't up anymore. The majority of discussion and voting were done on these forums. We're still able to see Matt Frank's awesome designs on DeviantArt, however. So, how did the roster end up? For Kaiju Land battles, we have Komododon, Robo-Komododon, Gecko Shark, and Magnarok. Fallen Nemesis would have Nemesis, Ikamaken, Tornak, Macrosaurus, Katyusha, Tursacra, Duncan, Mora Titan, Dragon Lotus, Heart Eater, and Lycanoid. Development for the game started and seemed to go well. One thing to mention as well is that the Spigot game engine, the one used for the Godzilla games, was licensed and ready to be used for Colossal Kaiju Combat, so it seemed that a good framework was there already. Things seemed hunky-dory. The Kickstarter originally stated a release on the fall of 2013, but as time went on, it seemed that development started to slow and it wasn't going to meet its initial release window. Now, this is a normal occurrence in the world of game development, but this might have caused some backers to worry. You see, crowdfunded video game projects didn't have the best of a reputation, as there were examples of games that either underdelivered or were scams. Again, because of the forums being down, I can't get a detailed timeline, but a couple of things sparked criticism and controversy. One thing was that Simon started making a Colossal Kaiju Combat card game, which included some of the fan-made kaiju, and which you can apparently still buy. Backers saw this as their money being used for a project they didn't fund, and the majority of people did not like the cards. They saw the fan-made kaijus being made into cards as a sign that there weren't going to be any future Colossal Kaiju Combat games after the initial two. Another source of controversy was one of the characters on the roster, but more on that in a bit. Videos of early alpha gameplay for Fall of Nemesis as well as a trailer for the Kaiju Land Battles alpha were eventually released, and people were not impressed. It's also important to note that Kaiju Land Battles was not a free Facebook game anymore, but instead, a $5 game on Steam. It was greenlit and available as an early access game. Of course, people again saw this as a failure. Releasing a game that was supposed to be free and charging $5 didn't sit well with the backers, and they saw it as further proof that the dev team were out of money. The dev team had other speed bumps along the way. There was a lawsuit from Wizard of the Coast. They claimed trademark infringement because apparently Kaiju Battle is too close to Kaijudo, one of their card games. Sunstone Games thought nothing of it. You see, Kaiju is a Japanese word that means strange beast, and since it's a common word, they'd figure there was no case, and that it would be settled between the lawyers. However, they were wrong, and the lawsuit caused Kickstarter to take down their page. Eventually, Kaiju Combat was renamed Colossal Kaiju Combat, and was trademarked to avoid any further legal issues. Tragedy also struck the company, as Ron Claiborne, the environmental artist for this project, sadly passed away from cancer. Ron Claiborne was the environmental artist for the 3 Godzilla games, so he had specialized knowledge of what was to be done. With his passing, they would have trouble finding a replacement. This caused delays in development, because the environmental parts of the game, such as building destruction and environment interaction, were the next to be worked on. In May of 2016, development was suspended. The community and backers had different opinions on why. Some called the team a bunch of scam artists. Others said that the project was just a mismanaged mess. But there was also a third opinion, which is what I heard when I last kept up with news of the project. There's a lot of posts around the internet that ask, what happened to Colossal Kaiju Combat? And usually, the answer is something like, because of furries. You see, another great source of controversy and source of blame regarding the project's development being suspended was regarding a character on the roster. That character was Duncan, which was created by a furry. Going back to my personal experience, I saw this project when the funding phase already ended, and would actually have wanted to make a contribution if I saw it earlier. I enjoyed the Godzilla games, and a new kaiju fighting game sounded great. I kept up with the game updates for a little while, but eventually stopped as the updates seemed to slow down. The last I heard about it, there was a huge issue with Duncan and his creator, who also went by Duncan, since it was his persona. But how did a furry cause so much trouble, you ask? Well, for starters, people seem split on the design. A lot of people didn't like it because it was just plain. He was a giant green kangaroo. And then once people found out it was created by a furry, they liked it even less. But looking back at the roster, he seemed popular enough to be voted in, right? So what's the issue? There's many stories about Duncan and what happened, but I'll mention what I often see repeated. Apparently, Duncan was a backer who contributed a large amount of money, and he was very peculiar on how his creation would be used. Some even phrased it as holding the company hostage, threatening to pull out his money should they not adhere to his vision of Duncan. He supposedly even caused two fan-favorite characters to be pulled from the game, Shadow of Red, also known as just Red, and Solomon, two monsters based on a Godzilla creepypasta. I've seen different versions of this story. One is that Red was supposed to have some sort of ability where it would corrupt the opponent, or create an evil version, or something along those lines, and Duncan didn't want his creation to be seen as evil or be able to be corrupted. Another reason was just that he didn't want Duncan anywhere near something as evil as Red, and be shown as fearful, or again, some other reason. I can't find a concrete answer, but basically, Red was a no-go because of Duncan, and since Solomon was supposed to be Red's rival, it didn't make sense to have one without the other, and thus they were both removed from the game. This is one example, but the overall consensus seems to be that Duncan was very difficult to work with and caused development issues. For the sake of fairness, let's get Duncan's side. Duncan released a post on the furry forum, and in it, he mentions that he backed the original Kickstarter for Kaiju Combat, which he states asked for $1 million without anything to show. I looked this up and apparently there was a previous Kickstarter. However, it shows the goal as $300,000, so I think Duncan is just misremembering. There's also a Kickstarter for porting the Fall of Nemesis to the Ouya, but more on that later. Continuing on, Duncan contributed $500 to get his character in, but the original Kickstarter did not meet its goal. When the second Kickstarter was created, Simon contacted him and asked if he was still interested, which he was, and again contributed $500. Since the project met its goal this time, he got to the character creation meetings. Here, he realized that Matt Frank did not like Duncan, and, quote, the way the conversation went, it felt like it was Matt's way or the highway, end quote. Duncan messaged Simon detailing his concerns, and basically said that instead of the $500, he'll still back it up, but with a smaller contribution. Simon convinced Duncan to stay, as he thought the character would be a fun addition, and said he'll talk to Matt. And so Duncan was created, and eventually voted in, from some help from his furry friends it seems. After that, he never followed the updates closely, and it wasn't until later that he found out that a lot of people blamed him for the project's issues. It wasn't until years later that he made this post to give his side of the story. So, what happened here?
Hey, what happened?
Which side is correct? Well, isn't there someone we forgot to ask? After the development was suspended, Simon posted a message, which I can't see because again, the forums. But what I can see is a town hall meeting that Simon live streamed and uploaded to YouTube. In this town hall meeting, he goes over questions and addresses misconceptions. Now, this video is like 2 hours long, so I'll just mention the key points. First, let's talk common misconceptions. The Kickstarter promised multiple IPs. Now I can see how the backers would assume this. In the Kickstarter page under the heading, "When will Kaiju Combat be released?" it says, quote, "Our ideal schedule would have an initial release in the fall of 2013, and 2 or 3 releases a year for at least 2 years after that, depending on the size of each release. Obviously, our contributors will have a lot of influence here on the size and frequency of new releases." End quote. Simon probably cleared this up on the forums, but we have to remember, we don't know how many backers were also forum members. It's possible that a sizable number of backers weren't actively on the forum, or even members at all. He might have cleared this up on other venues, but I would have no way of knowing. Community designed monsters were all going to be in the games. This one just seems to be a case of people getting a bit too excited. The $500 pledge says that monsters would be eligible to be in the game. No promise made. I even checked the Wayback Machine to check if the description was changed, and it wasn't. The Kaiju Combat Wiki states that characters would have to go through a content selection process. Nothing was made in 4 years. This is most likely just a result of people becoming increasingly upset at the game being delayed, and at the same time seeing that a card game was being developed. When the offer for Kaiju Land Battles was released, people were disappointed. You could understand some of their frustrations, but to say that nothing was done is a bit unfair. Simon takes blame for not handling the misconceptions better. He thought that rather than constantly correcting individual comments, the misconceptions would go away if he made constant posts and updates with the correct information.
But that is so hard, and I had this idea, perhaps it was foolish, that if I can put out the correct information and make it very clear, have a good official source for correct information, that people would generally spread the correct information and the incorrect information would slowly die out.
But the misconceptions didn't go away, and some of them eventually were treated as fact, like the controversy with the trading cards. Speaking of the cards, the backers really did not like the Kaiju cards. But Simon really liked the Kaiju cards.
How much effort Simon put in the cards? Yeah, I mean, but I liked it. And honestly, I got so good at it, and it actually helped me with my board game work because I did all the printing stuff. I got a lot of it there.
And he also realized that the audience for these was in the minority.
Honestly, so it's confusing because there's like, honestly, there are maybe 150 or 200 people who really like the cards and buy all the cards and like the card game, and that's, you know, there's really like there's 150 of you that just, I know who you are. I send you packages all the time. You keep buying the cards. You like the cards, but there are hundreds of people who at one time or another have said mean things about the cards or how stupid the cards are. And I have a hard time figuring out, like, I don't really know what to do. Like, if I made a card game, a digital card game, how many people would yell at me because they feel like I'm taking away development from Fall of Nemesis?
And he also defends them. He explains that just because he was working on the cards, that doesn't mean that he was removing resources away from the development of the games, as the majority of the work lied on, well, the developers. In fact, the cards made them money, which is put back into the game development.
It cost me about $70 per card, all right, to make the cards. Most of that is paying Frankie for the art, but then also for printing cards and stuff, like it's about $70. Here's how the math of that has worked: is that we did sponsorships, and so we'd make, you know, $300 on sponsorships, and then all the people who won would each pay $20, $25, and that would pay for, that would pay for all the development, and so then we would get these cards. So the cards just basically paid for themselves.
Speaking of money, the forums cost about $800 to $900 a year to keep the servers up. Someone asked whether the Kickstarter money was all used up or not. It was, but they still got money saved up from other resources.
Okay, let's see. Is there any money left from the Kickstarter? we have spent more money than we earned on the Kickstarter. However, there is still some money left in our coffers because we make money on things beyond just Kickstarter. There are also pre-orders. There was also all the card sales. There were, sandbox figure sales. There was money that I made at G-Fest. And in fact, there's money that I make from other Sunstone Games things. Because Sunstone Games is an entity outside of Kaiju Combat, and that I make some amount of money from selling the Sunstone game on mobile devices, for example. So Sunstone Games still has money, a few $1,000s, not a whole lot. We've already spent more than we got in the Kickstarter, but there is still some money available for development.
Another resource for Sunstone was a contract they signed with Pipeworks.
Pipeworks has a contract where they own 20% of the Kaiju Combat franchise, and so if Pipeworks allocates people to work on Kaiju Combat, that's no money out of my pocket. So there's one way that people could work on the game without us spending any money.
The Kickstarter to port Fall of Nemesis to the Ouya was also brought up. It didn't meet its goal, by the way. Simon explains that Ouya was offering to double the funds of successfully raised Kickstarters that ported games to the Ouya. So, Simon saw this as a way to potentially double some money. If the Kickstarter failed, nothing would happen, since no money was expended for it. It was a win-win situation for the development of the game, but to the backers, it looked like another sign of failure. Simon also mentioned that he did not receive any money since development started on Fall of Nemesis.
Very briefly, I would like to clarify that I have not received a single dime for any work. I have not paid myself a thing.
Any money he made, he put back into the Sunstone Games bank account to be used for the games they were developing. And speaking of games, people asked just how much of Fall of Nemesis was done. The answer we got was that half the character models were made, and none of the environments were made. In addition, some character-specific stuff also needed to be done. I assume it's the abilities for certain characters. For example, Macrosaurus was going to have his energy meter increased by eating objects from the environment, which cannot be worked on, since the environment itself still needs to be developed. At the time of the video, no new environmental artist had been found since the death of Ron. People also gave suggestions on how to save this game, so it could still be released. Everything from reducing roster size and environmental stuff.
I don't think that's really a good option. Our environments, the 4 environments that I have planned for Fall of Nemesis, that's bare bones. There's no reason to cut beyond that. That's bare bones. Cutting back on the roster, yeah, you could save a little money doing that way, but it just makes the game worse.
To getting offshore contractors as a cheaper alternative for developers.
But what we're doing here is I'm really relying on all of my people to be really self-reliant. I simply don't have time to check somebody's work. So if somebody gives me 100 hours of work, it's going to probably take me 20 or 30 hours to put that in the game and check it all. And then I would come back and say, oh, there's some changes I need. It's probably weeks later, and they've forgotten and they're not ready to make changes. That's not how I want to work. I need people who are familiar with the systems already and can get things put in right away.
To even another Kickstarter.
Having another Kickstarter. This is very popular. People say, what about another Kickstarter? Honestly, money won't help. Now, obviously, okay, now that's a lie. If I had millions of dollars sitting around, yes, I could fix this all with money. But if I'm able to do it through friends and through Pipeworks, it's just so much more efficient. That's really how we have to do it.
Simon explains what's needed for the game to be completed, and that's about $40,000 to $50,000 worth of work, which he states will cost $200,000 to get that work. Not sure what he meant by that, but I assume it's overhead expenses.
Well, really, we're talking about $40,000 or $50,000 worth of work that I need here. It would probably cost $200,000 for me to get that $40,000 worth of work, if I had to do it with money.
Overall, the livestream served as an attempt to clear things up and address questions and concerns from the community. People were understanding for the most part.
Gamora says, I'm just baffled that there's still push towards keeping it going despite the fact it's been nothing but a train wreck. Is that a question? Not really. Thank you for not being super mean. Like I said, I don't like it when people are mean to me, but I expected some people to just jump in and be mean to me, and you let me go. So that was nice.
So what led to Fall of Nemesis not being completed? The backer/community had 3 different opinions. Sunstone Games are scam artists and took the money. Duncan's influence delayed development, eating up resources. Sunstone Games mismanaged this project. The only thing Duncan says about the project was that it was far from a successful Kickstarter, so I'm going to assume that he also thinks the project was mismanaged. His post mostly defends himself against the allegations that he was the reason for the project's failure. And finally, Simon, on behalf of Sunstone Games. Without being able to see the original statement announcing the suspension of development, I can only go by the town hall meeting. He, like Duncan, also defends himself and tries to clear up any misconceptions, while also letting us know what he needs to finish development. Let's do a process of elimination. I think it's pretty clear at this point that it wasn't a scam, so we can disregard that. As for the Duncan controversy, I'm siding with Duncan on this one. I wasn't able to find anything that said Red and Solomon were going to be in the game and then removed. The only posts where I saw this were the same posts that blamed Duncan and the furries for the failure of Fall of Nemesis. And I don't think Duncan had enough resources where he was able to strong-arm the developers into doing what he wanted. The backers that were very upset with Fall of Nemesis weren't even able to get back their refunds. Since Kickstarter doesn't guarantee a delivered product, it's merely a platform to invest in something. If the backers weren't able to get their money back, I doubt Duncan would be able to as well. Duncan might have been hard to work with in the design meetings, but that's something that we'll never know, and that's between Duncan, Matt, and Simon. And from an old development update video, Simon seemed to love Duncan. So, I'm crossing out that Duncan was at fault here, and what's left is that the project was mismanaged. Simon did a good job in explaining things and dispelling some misconceptions. For example, the community saying he spent backers' money to create a card game, even though the card game was separate and actually made more money for the project. But the reality is, $100,000 is a small amount to develop a game. To put things into perspective, Angry Birds costs about $140,000 to make, and that's a pretty simple phone game. Fall of Nemesis wasn't going to be built from scratch, as it had an existing game engine that would, at worst, need some modifications. But $100,000 is still a low amount, especially as it gets delayed. Remember, the original Kickstarter asked for $300,000, so it seemed like Simon and his team knew about what it would cost to create a game, and when they weren't able to raise the $300,000, tried a smaller campaign and reduced their scope. And just to clear up any confusion, this isn't a case of Sunstone Games wanting to create Fall of Nemesis with $300,000 and then asking for less money when the first campaign failed. They didn't know exactly what they were going to create until after the campaign was a success. The lawsuit with Wizards of the Coast caused Kickstarter to rename the first Kickstarter campaign, making it seem that way. To me, there's a couple of reasons why this game did not get made. It seems like it was a risky investment, and the company wasn't well prepared to handle risks, like the lawsuit, delays, and tragic death of their staff. This one hurts a bit to say, but it just seems like the interest wasn't there. There certainly wasn't enough to raise $300,000, even though the community that did exist was very passionate and vocal. From an outsider's perspective, Pipeworks might not have had interest either. They only provided workers when they were in between projects, and even that stopped when they got bought out by another company. They already owned 20%, so if it came out and made money, they did as well. Otherwise, it would just fail, and all they invested was workers that were in between projects. And maybe some money as well, but we don't know the full details of the contract. Finally, there seemed to be a disconnect between Simon's vision and the backers. The community was very important to Simon, and in the town hall explained how he would like to keep the community going. To Simon, Fall of Nemesis was just one part of the bigger picture of what he wanted to create. A brand centered around the passionate community of all things kaiju. But to the backers, the majority, well, at least the vocal majority, saw Fall of Nemesis as the main thing, or perhaps the only thing they were interested in. Simon really wants to finish Fall of Nemesis and do his best on releasing a great game, but he didn't like the idea that the community existed solely for this game. He wanted the community to continue on. Simon remains optimistic in the town hall meeting, but isn't afraid to say how things are. It's unfortunate that this game wasn't finished and released. I was looking forward to it, as was the passionate community in the Kaiju Combat forums. But who knows? Maybe somewhere down the line, this project will be continued where it left off.